Have you ever had someone try to take something from you that meant more than they could possibly understand? Not something of monetary value, but something tied to your soul, to your history, to the very person you are. That's what happened to me. The Homeowners Association president in my quiet, suburban neighborhood decided my American flag was an eyesore. She didn't just ask me to take it down, she declared war on it. My name is Jack Armstrong. For 30 years, I served in the United States Army, retiring as a colonel. Most of my career was spent in places far from the manicured lawns of the estates at Maple Creek. I've seen the best and worst of humanity, and all I wanted in retirement was peace. I wanted a small garden, a comfortable chair on my porch, and the quiet company of my memories. The flag I flew wasn't just a piece of cloth from a big box store. It was the flag that flew over my final command post in a dusty, forgotten corner of the world. It was presented to me by my men, folded with reverent ceremony. Every star, every stripe, was a testament to the people I served with, especially those who never made it home. It was my memorial, my reminder, my connection to a life I had left behind. But to Carol Petrov, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, it was a violation of Article 4, Section 3, subsection B, prohibition of non-approved exterior attachments. What she didn't know was that in my career, I didn't just lead soldiers. I specialized in strategy, logistics, and military law. I was a man who understood rules better than she ever could, and I knew how to dismantle an opponent who underestimated me. She thought she was dealing with a simple old soldier. She was about to find out she had picked a fight with a man who had planned operations that shaped nations, and I was about to turn that same meticulous, unrelenting focus onto her petty little kingdom. Have you ever seen a bully crumble when they finally meet real, unshakable resistance? Stick around, because I'm going to tell you exactly how I took down our HOA Karen, not with anger or force, but with a plan she never saw coming, culminating in a public meeting that our neighborhood would never forget. It's a story about a flag, yes, but it's also about the quiet strength that lies in knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for, and the spectacular miscalculation of someone who judges a book by its quiet, unassuming cover. She was about to learn that some things and some people are not to be trifled with. My first interaction with Carol Petrov was deceptively pleasant, in the way a venomous snake might appear to be just a colorful branch until it moves. I had been in my new home for about a month, enjoying the anonymity of it all. My neighbors were polite but distant, which suited me fine. I'd spent a lifetime in close quarters with others. Solitude was a luxury. I had installed the flagpole myself. It wasn't ostentatious, a simple 20-foot pole, professionally installed and properly lit at night as per the U.S. flag code. The flag itself, the cherished 3 by 5-foot garrison flag from my last post, flew proudly. One Tuesday morning, as I was watering my newly planted rose bushes, a golf cart glided to a halt at the end of my driveway. Behind the wheel was a woman with a helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could withstand a hurricane, wearing a pastel pink tracksuit and an expression of supreme authority. This was Carol. She smiled, a tight, practiced gesture that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning," she chirped, her voice a little too loud for the quiet street. "You must be Mr. Armstrong. I'm Carol Petrov, president of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association. Welcome to the neighborhood." I returned the greeting, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Pleasure to meet you. Just Jack is fine." Her eyes flicked from me to the flag, and the smile tightened a fraction more. "Jack, we are so thrilled to have you. We pride ourselves on maintaining a certain aesthetic here at Maple Creek, a standard of excellence that keeps our property values high." I nodded, sensing this was not a social call. "It's a beautiful neighborhood. That's why I chose it indeed," she continued, her gaze fixed on the flag. "Which is why I need to talk to you about that." She gestured vaguely with a perfectly manicured hand. "The pole. It's not in compliance with community guidelines." I kept my expression neutral. "I believe it is. I reviewed the HOA covenants before I purchased. There's no specific prohibition against flagpoles, and I'm certainly not in violation of the freedom to display the American Flag Act of 2005. The mention of federal law seemed to annoy her. It was a language she wasn't used to hearing from a resident. Her tone shifted from feigned friendliness to condescending instruction. That act allows for a flag to be displayed on a bracket attached to the house. A freestanding pole, however, is considered a structural addition and requires pre-approval from the Architectural Review Committee, which I chair. I see, I said. Well, I'd be happy to submit a retroactive application. I can have the paperwork to you this afternoon. I was offering a peaceful, bureaucratic solution. It was a test. Her reaction would tell me everything I needed to know about her objective. A reasonable person would accept. A tyrant would escalate. Carol scoffed the small, sharp sound. Oh no, it's too late for that. The application would be denied anyway. We don't approve polls. They're visually disruptive. You have 14 days to remove the structure, or fines will begin to accrue at $50 per day. It's all in the bylaws you agreed to. She said it with such finality, such smug satisfaction. She wasn't enforcing a rule. She was exerting power. My flag, my memorial, was simply a convenient target for her to demonstrate her dominance. I felt a familiar, cold calm settle over me. It was the same feeling I'd get before a mission, when the time for talk was over and the time for planning began. I won't be taking it down, Carol, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Her eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock. She wasn't accustomed to being told no. Excuse me? This is a negotiation, Jack. It's a rule. It's a misinterpretation of a vague rule, and it conflicts with federal law. I replied, still calm. The poll stays. She stared at me, her face hardening. The mask of the friendly neighborhood welcome wagon had evaporated. You will regret this, she hissed, her voice low and tight. You have no idea who you're dealing with. She gunned the electric motor of the golf cart and sped off, leaving me standing in my driveway. I looked up at the flag, snapping crisply in the morning breeze. She was right about one thing. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She had just declared war on a retired Army colonel over the American flag. She thought she was laying down the law, but all she had done was give me a new mission. And I never, ever failed a mission. The first official notice arrived 3 days later. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope with the estates at Maple Creek logo embossed in gold. Inside, a letter typed on heavy bond paper formally detailed my violation. It cited the same vague clause Carol had mentioned. Article 4, Section 3, subsection B, prohibition of non-approved exterior attachments and structural additions. The letter, signed with a flourish by Carol Petrov, President, reiterated the 14-day deadline and the $50 daily fine. There was a new, passive-aggressive addition. We trust you will act as a good neighbor and respect the collectively agreed-upon standards that make our community a desirable place to live. The implication was clear. I was the problem. I was the bad neighbor disrupting the harmony. I read the letter twice, then placed it on my desk. It was time to switch from defense to intelligence gathering. My first step in any operation was to know the terrain, the enemy, and the rules of engagement. In this case, the terrain was the HOA's own labyrinthine book of covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and RS. I poured a cup of black coffee and sat down with the thick binder I'd been given at closing. For the next 5 hours, I read every single word. I highlighted, I made notes, I cross-referenced sections. It was as dense and bureaucratic as any military field manual, but the principles were the same. It was a document designed to be wielded as a weapon by those who knew its intricacies. I discovered a few interesting things. First, Carol was technically correct that a flagpole wasn't explicitly mentioned as an approved item. However, the definition of structural addition was incredibly vague, and a separate section on landscaping allowed for decorative posts for lighting or ornamentation, provided they were under a certain height. My flagpole fit the height requirement. It was a weak point in her argument that seemed I could exploit. Second, I found a section on how violations were processed. A notice was the first step. If the issue wasn't resolved, the board could levy fines. If the fines went unpaid, they could place a lien on the property. This was her escalation ladder. But the process also required a formal vote by the entire 3-person HOA board for any fine to be officially levied. Carol was the president, a man named Bob was the treasurer, and a woman named Susan was the secretary. I needed to know more about them. Carol had made this personal, but I would make my response procedural. That evening, I drafted a formal reply. I didn't use email. I typed it, printed it on good quality paper, and sent it via certified mail to the HOA's official address, which was a P.O. box. This created a legal paper trail. In the letter, I was polite but firm. I stated that I believe my flagpole was in compliance under the section pertaining to decorative posts. I formally requested clarification on the definition of a structural addition. I also cited the freedom to display the American Flag Act of 2005 again, arguing that while it specifies bracket-mounted flags, its spirit is to prevent associations from prohibiting the display of the flag altogether, and that their denial of a tasteful flagpole was a de facto prohibition. Finally, I formally requested a hearing before the full HOA board to discuss the matter. That was my right according to the bylaws I had so carefully studied. I knew this letter would infuriate Carol. She wanted simple compliance, not a well-reasoned, legally grounded debate. She wanted a subject, not an opponent. 2 days later, I got my answer. It wasn't a formal letter. It was an email from her personal account, dripping with condescension. "Jack," it began, "we are not here to debate the spirit of the law. The rules are clear. The committee's decision is final. Your request for a hearing is denied, as there is nothing to discuss. The flagpole is a violation. Please remove it to avoid further action." She had just made her second critical mistake. By denying my right to a hearing, a right explicitly granted in the bylaws, she had overstepped her authority. She was no longer just enforcing a rule. She was breaking one. I saved the email, printed it out, and placed it in a growing folder I had labeled Operation Enduring Freedom. My next step was to conduct reconnaissance on the other board members. I found Bob working in his yard the next day. He was a portly man in his late 60s with a friendly, if somewhat weary, demeanor. I introduced myself, and we made small talk about lawns and the weather. I gently steered the conversation toward the HOA. "Seems like a well-run community," I said casually. Bob sighed. "It is mostly Carol. She's very dedicated, very detail-oriented." The way he said detail-oriented told me everything. It was a euphemism for tyrannical. "She seems to take the rules very seriously," I probed. "Oh, you have no idea," he chuckled without humor. "She runs the board like her own personal fiefdom. Susan and I are mostly there to second her motions. It's easier than arguing." I had my second piece of intelligence. The board was a rubber stamp. Carol was a dictator. This meant a direct appeal to them was useless. I had to go bigger. I had to appeal to the entire community. Carol thought she was isolating me, painting me as the problem. It was time to show our neighbors who the real problem was. The battle for Maple Creek was just beginning. My investigation into Carol Petrov began in earnest. In the military, we called it open source intelligence, or OSINT. It's amazing what you can find out about a person from publicly available records, social media, and simple observation. I wasn't looking for personal dirt to blackmail her. That wasn't my style. I was looking for hypocrisy. I was looking for evidence that she applied the rules to others, but not to herself. A leader who doesn't follow their own regulations has no legitimacy. My first stop was the County Property Records website. I looked up her address. The records showed the original building permit for her house, and then nothing. No permits for the large, elaborate deck and pergola in her backyard, which I could just see over the fence from the street behind her house. I took a walk down that street, my phone in my pocket. Her deck was a massive, two-level structure, clearly a recent addition. According to the very HOA bylaws she was wielding against me, any structural addition, and a deck and pergola most certainly qualified, required a detailed plan submission to the Architectural Review Committee and, crucially, a county building permit. I had a strong suspicion she had acquired neither. This was more than hypocrisy. It was a serious violation that could have insurance and liability implications for the entire community. I photographed the structure from the public sidewalk, the pictures clear and damning. Next, I turned to the community's social media page. It was a private group, but I had been added when I moved in. I spent hours scrolling through years of posts. Carol was prolific. Her posts were a masterclass in passive aggression and self-congratulation. A gentle reminder to everyone to bring your trash cans by 6 p.m. on collection day. Let's keep our streets looking pristine, followed by a photo of a neighbor's can left out at 6:05. So proud of the new petunias planted at the community entrance. A big thank you to the board, mostly me, for making it happen. But amidst the self-aggrandizing posts, I found a pattern. Whenever a resident questioned a decision or a fee, Carol's response was swift and dismissive. She would often claim the decision was made per the budget, but she never posted the budget itself. According to the bylaws, the HOA's annual budget was supposed to be transparent and available to any homeowner who requested it. I sent another certified letter, this time formally requesting a copy of the last 3 years of HOA financial statements and budgets, as was my right. While I waited for her response, I continued my digital deep dive. I found Carol's personal social media profiles. She was less guarded there. Pictures from lavish vacations, posts about expensive home renovations, just love our new spa bathroom, #blessed, and photos of her prized rose garden. It was in the rose garden photos that I found my second aha moment. Her garden was immaculate, bordered by a low, decorative, wrought iron fence. It was tasteful, I had to admit. It was also a clear violation of another rule I had highlighted in the CC and RS. No fencing of any kind shall be erected in front yards or side yards visible from the street. Her fence was in her front yard, clearly visible, a permanent metal structure. She was fining me for a flagpole she deemed visually disruptive while she enjoyed a patently illegal fence. The hypocrisy was staggering. I saved screenshots of everything. The deck, the fence, her boasts about unpermitted renovations. My evidence folder was getting thick. A week later, I received an email response to my request for the financial documents. It was, predictably, from Carol. Jack, the HOA's finances are reviewed and audited annually, as required. The budget is not a public document for general distribution. If you have a specific concern about a line item, you can submit a query in writing. She was stonewalling. She was illegally withholding documents that I, as a fee-paying member of the association, was legally entitled to see. This was her third and most serious mistake. Misinterpreting a rule about a flagpole was one thing. Denying a homeowner their right to a hearing was worse. But actively concealing the community's financial records? That smelled of something far more serious than a simple power trip. It suggested she had something to hide. My mission had now expanded. This was no longer just about my flag. It was about a leader who operated in secrecy, ruled by fiat, and held herself above the very laws she so zealously enforced on others. She had created a system of control based on intimidation and bureaucratic obfuscation. My strategy was beginning to form, and it was a classic one. I would use her own system, her own rules, and her own arrogance to dismantle her authority piece by piece in a very public forum. I now had the intelligence I needed. It was time to move on to the next phase, planning the operation. The core of any successful operation is a clear, concise plan. I sat at my dining room table, which I had converted into my command center. My evidence folder was open, the highlighted copy of the HOA bylaws sat next to it, and on a fresh legal pad, I began to outline my strategy. I codenamed it Operation Patriot's Stand. The objective was simple, to secure my right to fly my flag. The method, however, would be comprehensive. It involved 3 distinct lines of effort, designed to converge at a single point in time. The annual HOA members' meeting, which the bylaws stated must be held in the first week of November. It was 6 weeks away. Phase 1, legal fortification. My first action was to consult a lawyer. Not to sue, but to verify my position. I found a local attorney who specialized in property law and HOA disputes. I paid for a 1-hour consultation and laid out my case. The flagpole, Carol's denial of a hearing, her refusal to provide financial documents, and the evidence of her own violations. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Davis, listened intently. When I was done, she smiled. "Mr. Armstrong, you have her dead to rights," she said. "The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act is on your side, but her procedural violations are an even bigger hammer. Denying you a hearing and withholding financial records are serious breaches of her fiduciary duty as a board member. The unpermitted deck is a liability for the entire HOA. You don't just have a case, you have a kill shot. She advised me on the precise wording for my next communication and confirmed that my strategy of waiting for the annual meeting was sound. A public forum is the perfect place for this, she said. It prevents her from sweeping it under the rug. I left her office with a newfound confidence. My instincts were correct, and my position was legally unassailable. Phase 2, coalition building. I knew I couldn't be a lone voice. A single disgruntled resident can be dismissed as a crank. A group of united homeowners is a political force. I started taking evening walks around the neighborhood, deliberately at a time when people were getting home from work or out with their dogs. I didn't lead with my own grievance. I just introduced myself. I was the new guy, the retired colonel. People were curious. I listened to their stories. And it didn't take long for the subject of Carol and the HOA to come up. A young couple, the Garcias, were frustrated because their request to build a small, tasteful treehouse for their kids was denied as not in keeping with the community's aesthetic. An elderly woman, Mrs. Gable, had received a fine because her garden hose was left coiled next to her spigot instead of being in a fully enclosed container. Bob, the board treasurer I had spoken earlier, confessed to me during one of these walks that he was tired of Carol's overreach but didn't know how to stand up to her. She controls the agenda. She controls the meetings. It's impossible to get a word in, he lamented. I found my key ally in Susan, the board secretary. She was a quiet librarian who had been volunteered for the position. She was deeply uncomfortable with Carol's methods. I met with her for coffee, and after feeling her out, I share my story and some of my findings, specifically the denial of my hearing. As a secretary, she knew this was a procedural violation. She told us you had withdrawn your request, Susan said, her eyes wide. She lied to us. I had her. I didn't ask her to spy or to act immediately. I just asked her to do her job, to ensure the minutes of the next meeting were accurate and that proper procedure was followed. I was slowly building a network of neighbors who were all tired of living under Carol's thumb. I created a simple, one-page handout summarizing homeowners' rights under the bylaws: the right to a hearing, the right to review financial documents, the process for architectural reviews. I didn't mention Carol by name. I just distributed facts. I was arming my neighbors with knowledge. Phase 3, the bait. The final phase of my plan was to let Carol continue to believe she was winning. I stopped communicating with her. I let the fines accrue. I knew she would see my silence as submission. Her arrogance was her greatest weakness, and I needed it to be at its peak. As expected, 2 weeks before the annual meeting, I received another certified letter. This one was from the HOA's lawyer. It was a formal notice that a lien was being prepared for placement on my property for failure to pay the fines, which now totaled over $2,000. The letter stated that the matter would be formally ratified at the upcoming annual meeting. This was perfect. She had just placed my flagpole and her actions against me on the official agenda. She was building her own stage, arranging the lighting, and inviting the audience for her own public humiliation. She thought she was cornering me. In reality, she was walking straight into the kill zone I had so carefully prepared. The night before the meeting, I checked my preparations. I had a binder with every piece of evidence: dated photos, certified mail receipts, copies of the bylaws with relevant sections highlighted, screenshots of social media posts, the email where she denied me a hearing, and a printout from the county website showing the lack of permits for her property. I had a short, powerful speech prepared. I had spoken with my allies. They were ready. I looked out my front window. Under the soft glow of the dedicated spotlight, my flag waved gently in the cool November air. It had been a long 6 weeks. The intelligence was gathered, the plan was set, the coalition was built. Tomorrow, the battle for Maple Creek would be joined. The execution of my plan began subtly, long before the meeting itself. It was about controlling the narrative and setting the conditions for success. A week before the annual meeting, I sent a final, formal letter via certified mail to the entire HOA board, Carol, Bob, and Susan. This was a crucial step. In the military, you always give your opponent a chance to de-escalate, to surrender. It's not about kindness. It's about seizing the moral high ground and creating an unimpeachable record of your own reasonableness. In the letter, I calmly and professionally laid out my entire case, just as I had for my lawyer. I cited the specific bylaws Carol had violated, denying a member's right to a hearing, failing to provide financial documents upon request, and the clear conflict of interest in her own unapproved and unpermitted structures. I attached photographic evidence of her fence and deck. I stated that I believed the fines levied against me were done so improperly and without the required full board vote, as Susan had confirmed to me that no such formal vote had ever been called. I concluded the letter not with a threat, but with an offer. I am willing to consider this matter resolved. I wrote, if the board formally rescinds the fines, grants retroactive approval for my flagpole under the decorative post clause, and agrees to a third-party audit of the last 3 years of HOA finances to ensure transparency for all residents. I hope we can resolve this amicably for the good of the community. I knew Carol would never accept. Her ego wouldn't allow it. But the letter wasn't really for her. It was for Bob and Susan. It was to show them that I had given Carol one last chance to do the right thing. It forced them to choose a side before the meeting even began. As I expected, I received no official reply. But the night before the meeting, I got a nervous phone call from Bob. Jack, he whispered, I got your letter. Carol is furious. She called an emergency board meeting, just the 3 of us. She called you a troublemaker and said your claims were baseless. She wants us to present a unified front tomorrow and vote to place the lien on your property. I don't know what to do, Bob, I said calmly. You do what your conscience tells you is right. But I suggest you read Article 7 of the bylaws, the one about the personal liability of board members for willful misconduct. You've been officially notified of these issues. If you vote with her now, you could be just as liable as she is. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Thank you, Jack, he finally said, and hung up. The seed was planted. I had fractured her unified front. The day of the meeting, I continued to set the stage. I arrived at the community clubhouse 15 minutes early. The room was set up with rows of chairs, facing a long table at the front for the board. Carol was already there, bustling around, arranging papers, looking supremely confident. She gave me a smug, triumphant smirk as I walked in. I simply nodded politely and took a seat in the front row. My neighbors began to file in. The Garcias, Mrs. Gable, and a dozen others I had spoken to. They all gave me subtle nods of support. Susan arrived and took her seat at the board table, looking pale but determined. Bob came in last, avoiding eye contact with both me and Carol, and sat down heavily. The room was more crowded than usual. My one-page handout on homeowner rights had clearly made the rounds. There was a tension in the air that was usually absent from these sleepy, procedural meetings. Carol, oblivious, beamed at the turnout, likely interpreting it as support for her strong leadership. She called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. They went through the usual business. Minutes from the last meeting, the treasurer's report, which Bob read in a monotone, providing vague numbers but no real detail, and the report from the landscaping committee, which was just Carol talking about her petunias. Then, she arrived at the main event. New business, she announced, her voice ringing with authority. Item 1, ratification of fines and approval of lien placement for the property at 112 Patriot Way for non-compliance with community covenants. She looked directly at me. The resident, Mr. Jack Armstrong, has erected an unapproved structural pole and has refused to comply with multiple notices to remove it. The board has voted to levy fines, which have gone unpaid. I need a motion to approve the placement of a lien on the property to recover these funds for the association. She looked at her fellow board members. Do I have a motion? There was a tense silence. Bob stared at the table. Susan looked at her notes. Carol's smile faltered. Bob, she prompted, her voice sharp. Bob cleared his throat. Carol, he said, his voice shaky but clear. Before we vote on that, I think the homeowner should be given a chance to speak. A murmur went through the crowd. This was not how Carol's meetings usually went. Carol's face flushed with anger. He has had every chance to comply, Bob. This is just a formality. Susan spoke up, her voice surprisingly firm. Actually, Carol, according to Robert's Rules of Order, which our bylaws state we must follow, a member subject to a punitive action has the right to address the assembly before the vote. She had done her homework. The trap was now sprung. Carol was cornered by the very procedures she was supposed to uphold. She glared at Susan, then at me. Fine, she spat, her voice dripping with venom. The resident may speak. Let's hear what excuse you have for breaking our rules. She gestured to the floor. The floor is yours, Mr. Armstrong. She sat back in her chair, crossing her arms, confident that whatever I said would be irrelevant. She was about to find out how wrong she was. I rose from my chair and walked to the small lectern set up for residents. I didn't bring a stack of papers with me. I had only a single index card with a few bullet points. I wanted to look directly at the board and my neighbors. I placed the card on the lectern and took a moment, letting the silence in the room build. All eyes were on me. Carol was watching with a look of bored contempt. I began, my voice calm and measured, the way I used to brief my commanding officers. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jack Armstrong, and I live at 112 Patriot Way. I'd like to thank the board for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. I looked at Carol. President Petrov, you are correct. I did erect a flagpole without prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee. That was an oversight on my part, and I apologize for it. When you first brought this to my attention, I offered to submit a retroactive application, an offer you immediately rejected. I paused, letting that sink in. You see, this isn't about an oversight. This is about a fundamental disagreement over the rules and how they are applied in our community. You have accused me of breaking the rules. Tonight, I will demonstrate to all of you that it is, in fact, the president of this board who has repeatedly and willfully broken the very bylaws she is sworn to uphold. A collective gasp went through the room. Carol's face went from smug to thunderous. That is an outrageous accusation, she snapped. I'm not finished, I said, my voice still level, cutting through her anger. Let's start with the charge against me. I'm being fined for an unapproved structural addition, yet our bylaws allow for decorative posts under a certain height. My flagpole meets this definition. When I attempted to discuss this interpretation, I was ignored. When I formally requested a hearing before the full board to present my case, as is my right under Article 9, Section 2, I was illegally denied that right in an email from President Petrov, an email in which she falsely claimed the committee's decision was final, a committee of one. It would seem I saw Susan nod almost imperceptibly. Bob continued to stare at the table. This denial of due process is not just unfair. It is a direct violation of our governing documents. But my concerns don't stop there. As a homeowner, I became concerned about the lack of transparency in our association's governance. On October 5th, I sent a certified letter to the board, as is my right under state law and our own bylaws, requesting copies of the last 3 years of financial statements and budgets. I received a reply from President Petrov, again from her personal email, illegally refusing to provide these documents. I looked out at my neighbors. Have any of you ever seen a detailed budget for this HOA? Do you know where your dues are actually going? Or are you, like me, simply told that everything is audited and in order? I could see heads shaking, people murmuring to each other. The Garcias were nodding vigorously. Mrs. Gable looked angry. A leader who operates in secret, I continued, and denies members their fundamental rights should not be in a position of authority. But the most troubling issue is the hypocrisy. We are all expected to live by these rules. The president should be the first to set an example. Instead, she holds herself above them. Now, I reached in my jacket pocket and pulled out a small stack of 8 by 10 glossy photos. I walked over to the board's table and placed the first one in front of Carol. It was a crystal-clear picture of the decorative iron fence around her rose garden. Article 6, Section 5, I stated, my voice like steel. No fencing of any kind shall be erected in front yards. This is a clear, unambiguous, and permanent violation. I then placed the second photo on the table. It was a shot of her massive, unpermitted deck. Article 4, Section 3, the very same section I am being fined under, requires ARC approval and county permits for any structural addition. A quick check of the public county records shows no permit was ever pulled for this structure, which is not only an HOA violation, but a violation of municipal law. This exposes our entire association to significant legal and insurance liabilities. The room was dead silent. Carol was staring at the photos, her face ashen. Her carefully constructed world of absolute authority was shattering around her. She had been publicly exposed as a hypocrite and a lawbreaker. But I wasn't done yet. The final piece of my operation, the part that would change the entire emotional dynamic of the room, was yet to come. I had broken her down with procedure and evidence. Now, it was time to show them all exactly what she had been attacking. I returned to the lectern, leaving the incriminating photos on the table for all to see. Carol was speechless, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. Bob and Susan were staring at the pictures, then at Carol, the full scope of her duplicity dawning on them. The mood in the room had shifted from a simple rules dispute to a full-blown crisis of leadership. My neighbors were looking at Carol with open hostility. "So, we have a pattern," I said, my voice resonating in the stunned silence. "A pattern of breaking rules, denying rights, and concealing information, all while punishing other residents for the most minor of infractions. This isn't about maintaining property values. This is about one person's abuse of power." I turned my gaze back to Carol. "And throughout this entire process, you have attacked one thing above all else, my flagpole. You called it visually disruptive and eyesore of violation. You have tried to fine me, lien my property, and publicly shame me, all to force me to take down a piece of cloth on a pole." I paused, letting my words hang in the air. "I'd like to tell you all what that piece of cloth is." I reached into my other jacket pocket and pulled out a folded, formal document. I unfolded it slowly. It was a military citation. "For 30 years, I served this country in the United States Army. I serve in places most people only see on the news. I've been decorated for my service, but I don't display my medals. I don't talk about it. I came here for peace and quiet." My voice grew stronger, filled with a gravity it had lacked before. "The flag flying on that pole is not just any flag. It was the last flag to fly over my command post in Afghanistan. It was given to me by the men and women I had the honor to lead. Men and women who risked everything, every single day, in service to this nation. Some of them never came home. That flag flew for them. It flew for their families. It is my personal memorial to their sacrifice." I looked around the room, making eye contact with my neighbors. I saw tears welling in Mrs. Gable's eyes. Mr. Garcia had his arm around his wife. "So when you attack that flag," I said, locking my eyes with Carol's, "you are not attacking a breach of aesthetics. You are desecrating a memorial. You are telling every veteran in this community, every Gold Star family, every person who loves this country, that your personal taste is more important than their service and their sacrifice." The silence was broken by a single, sharp sound. A man in the back of the room, an older gentleman I recognized as a Marine veteran from his hat, stood up and began to clap. Slowly, then all at once, the rest of the room joined him. The clubhouse filled with thunderous applause. It wasn't for me. It was for the flag. It was for the soldiers who had served under it. It was a resounding, public rejection of Carol's petty tyranny. The applause went on for a full minute. Carol sat frozen, her face pale, the color drained from it. She was utterly defeated. The power she had wielded so ruthlessly had evaporated in an instant. I held up my hand, and the applause subsided. I had one final thing to say. I looked directly at the board, at Bob and Susan. "I am not a lawyer," I said, "but I have been advised that a board member who knowingly acts against the bylaws and engages in willful misconduct can be held personally liable for their actions. You have been presented with irrefutable evidence tonight. The choice of what to do next is yours." And then, for the final devastating blow, I revealed the one detail I had held in reserve. "Carol, you asked me once if I knew who you were. But the real question is, do you know who you're dealing with? You try to find a man for flying the American flag." I let that sink in. the very flag for which he was awarded this. I held up the citation in my hand. The Medal of Honor. A collective, audible gasp swept the room. It was one thing to be a veteran. It was another thing entirely. The highest award for valor this nation can bestow. The room, which had been hostile toward her, now looked at her with something approaching pure disgust. To attack the flag of any veteran was shameful. To do it to a Medal of Honor recipient was sacrilege. Her downfall was no longer a possibility. It was an absolute certainty. The tables had not just turned. They had been smashed to pieces. The aftermath was swift and decisive. In the echoing silence that followed my final revelation, all eyes were on Carol. She looked small, shrunken, stripped of the arrogant authority she wore like a suit of armor. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. It was Susan, the quiet librarian, who finally broke the spell. She stood up, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice clear as a bell. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in our president, Karol Petrov. Bob, his face a mixture of fear and relief, immediately seconded the motion. Seconded, he boomed, finding his voice at last. According to the bylaws, a vote of no confidence required a 2/3 majority of the members present. Before Carol could even protest, hands shot up all over the room. It was unanimous. Every single resident voted to remove her. In the space of 10 minutes, her reign was over. She was president no more. She gathered her papers with fumbling, clumsy hands, not looking at anyone, and fled the clubhouse. The following week was a whirlwind of change for the estates at Maple Creek. Bob was appointed interim president, and Susan remained secretary. An emergency election was scheduled to fill the vacant third seat. The first official act of a new board was to hold a special meeting. At that meeting, they formally and publicly apologized to me. They voted to rescind all fines and expunge the violation from my record. Then, they went further. They passed a new resolution, which they called the Patriots' Pride Rule, explicitly permitting the display of the American flag on a permanent, properly maintained flagpole by any resident, provided it adhered to the U.S. flag code. They used my setup as the official example. The Garcias were invited to resubmit their plan for a treehouse, which was approved on the spot. Mrs. Gable received a letter of apology and a refund for her garden hose fine. The new board, with Susan taking the lead, hired an independent accounting firm to conduct the full audit I had requested. The results were shocking. While Carol hadn't been embezzling funds outright, she had been grossly mismanaging them, spending tens of thousands of dollars on vanity projects like her petunias and a new, absurdly ornate sign for the community entrance, all without proper bids or homeowner approval. She had also been using HOA funds to pay a premium to a landscaping company owned by her brother-in-law. The audit findings were presented at the next meeting, and the community voted to hire a new, professional management company to handle the finances, ensuring transparency from that day forward. As for Carol, her humiliation was total. Faced with the audit's findings and the threat of legal action from the HOA to recoup the misspent funds, she and her husband put their house up for sale. The unpermitted deck and illegal fence became major sticking points with potential buyers, forcing her to either spend a fortune bringing them up to code or sell at a massive discount. Within 2 months, they were gone. A new family moved in, one who introduced themselves to their neighbors and flew a small garden flag from their porch. Peace returned to Maple Creek. The day after the vote, I was out on my porch enjoying a cup of coffee. One by one, my neighbors stopped by, not to talk about the meeting, but just to talk, to thank me, not for being a hero, but for being a good neighbor, for standing up and reminding them that a community is not about rules and fines. It's about people living together with mutual respect. Bob and Susan stopped by together. "Jack," Bob said, "we just wanted to say we're sorry it went so far. We should have stood up to her sooner." "You stood up when it counted," I replied. "That's all that matters." That afternoon, I stood in my yard and looked up at my flag. It snapped in the wind, a symbol not of a battle won, but of peace restored. The fight had been a distraction from the quiet life I sought, but had also taught me a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the defense of peace requires a fight. Sometimes the principles you hold dear have to be actively protected, whether on a foreign battlefield or in a suburban clubhouse. My war was over, but this final, unexpected battle had forged a new kind of bond, turning a neighborhood of strangers into a true community. And as I watched those stars and stripes wave against the blue sky, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The flag was home, and so was I.